Alrighty, YouTube, Niner Empire. One of the biggest questions going into this offseason is who will be the 49ers' next defensive coordinator after Steve Wilks was fired just last week. And there's a lot of candidates out there. I wouldn't say a lot of candidates, but there's a decent amount of candidates out there that the Niners can work with. And I think that with who is currently out there, the Niners can very well get their next guy and get back to the level of defense that they were playing just a couple years ago. But some of the most notable names out there that could potentially be Steve Wilks' successor with the Niners on the defensive side of things is Pete Carroll, Bill Belichick, Brandon Staley, Mike Vrabel. There's also been a lot of talk about the Niners potentially promoting defensive line coach Chris Kocurek to defensive coordinator, which I have been an advocate of Chris Kocurek being the defensive coordinator for some time now. I even said last season when DeMeco Ryans left, or at the end of last season, that I would not be opposed whatsoever to promoting Chris Kocurek. Get a guy that knows this defense, promote within house, and kind of start off where you left off. Obviously, that didn't happen. They ended up hiring Steve Wilks, and obviously, it never was a good fit in the end. There was a lot of good things that Steve Wilks did, but I think there was more negative things with the Steve Wilks hiring and just kind of the way it panned out than there was, positive things. And that's fine. I mean, that's the NFL. You have that here and there, like it is what it is. But clearly, the Niners, or Kyle Shanahan in particular, kind of evaluated that, and he didn't like that move, and he ended up firing Steve Wilks, which never, never in my opinion was I guess seen as a surprise. Like I could have always seen that coming in one way or another. But either way, obviously with Bill Belichick, he could very well come to San Francisco and kind of take on a more or take on a role that he hasn't been familiar with in a very long time. Bill Belichick is a great defensive-minded head coach. He's a great offensive-minded head coach, but he specializes in the defense. And with Bill Belichick, nobody hired him. He missed out on the head coach openings. Nobody ended up hiring him, so he could definitely take a step back this year, be a defensive coordinator, and then obviously next year or after next year, make an attempt to become a head coach for the second time, or I believe maybe the third or fourth time with Bill Belichick being a head coach. But Pete Carroll, same thing. Like he's in the same boat. He's been a head coach for many, many years. Has a very good defensive background. He was the Niners defensive coordinator in the mid-'90s, and he had a lot of success with the Niners as their defensive coordinator. Like him, though, he was promoted to a front office role with Seattle, but he has been open to accepting another head coaching job elsewhere, or going elsewhere and being a coach. I don't think Pete Carroll has any intentions of retiring anytime soon. And like Bill Belichick, the Niners could very well hire him to be their defensive coordinator. And again, like Belichick, following next season, he could then go out and interview and try to get another head coaching job. And same thing with Mike Vrabel. He was fired by Tennessee, missed out on head coaching jobs. Nobody hired him. He could definitely take a step back, be a defensive coordinator, and then try to get another head coaching job next year. To me, the Niners need to narrow this down, though, to like 3 guys. And in my opinion, I think the guy that should be number 1 on their list is Pete Carroll. I think Pete Carroll is the more natural fit with the Niners. The Niners have ran exactly, the 4-3 defense, wide 9 defense, the stuff that Pete Carroll has utilized for years in Seattle. Pete Carroll specializes in that type of defense. He specializes in the type of defense that the Niners currently run. And that is by far the more natural fit. And it only makes sense because obviously reports said that the reason why Pete Carroll was kind of pushed out in Seattle was due to the ownership. And what better way to get vengeance on them than to go be a defensive coordinator in the same division to an NFC West rival and, excel in doing so. So I think Pete Carroll should be number one on their list. I mean, it's a very, very, very similar defensive approach that they run, that the Niners run, that Pete Carroll has ran for years. Pete Carroll is from the Bay Area. He again was our defensive coordinator in the mid-'90s. He's got a lot of ties to the 49ers. Now, again, I mean, I think when it comes to Pete Carroll, obviously he hasn't ran a defense since he was with the Niners in the mid-'90s, but would Pete Carroll want to take a step back and be a defensive coordinator? I don't think he would not be open to it. I think he's probably open to pretty much anything right now, but I think the biggest thing right now is he's got so many ties to San Francisco. He was born here, and he was the defensive coordinator of a Niners team that finished first in the NFC West with a record of 11-5. And most notably, again, he had the NFL's second best defensive scoring, or the NFL's second best defense scoring-wise during his time with the Niners, and he only allowing 16.1 points per game. So Kyle Shanahan should definitely be considering Pete Carroll without a doubt, and it's going to be interesting to see what kind of way he goes. But to me, Pete Carroll has got to be the number one guy out there to potentially replace Steve Wilks. I would also be very open to Mike Vrabel. To me, the best three options for the Niners, though, is Pete Carroll, Mike Vrabel, or promoting Chris Kocurek, our defensive line coach, to defensive coordinator. I'm not opposed to the Niners hiring Bill Belichick by any means. I'm not. I just think this Niners defense will bold better, I guess, with guys like Pete Carroll and Mike Vrabel and Chris Kocurek just kind of knowing their personalities. But yeah, man, it'll be interesting to see kind of what direction the 49ers head in. With Brandon Staley, I'm not a big fan of him at all, man, like at all. And I get he had success as a defensive coordinator before he got the Chargers head coaching job, but I don't know. I mean, who knows? He could be hired and he could do very good things with the Niners defense. But again, I'm a big fan in the personality type of things when it comes to coaches, and I think Chris Kocurek, Mike Vrabel, and Pete Carroll would work best with this 49ers defense, just kind of knowing how these guys operate. Brandon Staley would probably be like one of the guys that I would avoid without a doubt. And last week, Mike Florio reported that some people in the league believe that the Niners will hire him as their next defensive coordinator. Kyle and Brandon Staley share the same agent. They don't have any experience with each other aside from going against each other in 2020 when Staley was the Rams defensive coordinator. But I just, to me, his tenure with the Chargers showed that he is not a coach that knows how to maximize the talent that he has. Staley was the defensive play caller for the Chargers, and every year they were just never able to establish themselves as an adequate force in the NFL. And teams would pretty much relish in facing them. And again, I mean, the biggest thing is again, he never seemed to know how to maximize the talent that he had. And that's, I think, something that Steve Wilks struggled with. I think a lot of his struggles kind of, stemmed from his defensive formations and some of his play calling and stuff, but I don't want Brandon Staley whatsoever. I don't. At the end of the day, it's up to Kyle Shanahan, and he's going to hire who he wants. But I think he's got a pretty good understanding of, look, like Steve Wilks didn't maximize our players' talent well on defense, and why in the hell would I think that a guy like Brandon Staley would come in and do much better than him? So, again, it'll be interesting to see what direction they go in, but one direction they need to steer away from is the Brandon Staley stuff. I mean, again, to me, it's Pete Carroll, Mike Vrabel, Chris Kocurek, probably Bill Belichick, and then everybody else. I'm pretty confident that Kyle will hire either Pete Carroll, Vrabel, or promote Chris Kocurek, and I'm fine with either of those options. But again, man, like knowing how Steve Wilks, how his kind of, situation ended with San Francisco, with not really knowing how to maximize the talent and pretty bad play calling. Again, Steve Wilks did a lot of great things with this defense as well. I'm not going to sit up here and just bash him and kind of point out all the bad things that he did, but it never was a good fit, and I don't think Brandon Staley's a good fit either. So we'll see what happens. Obviously, let me know who you guys think the Niners should hire as their next defensive coordinator. But for me, I would love Pete Carroll to come here and coach the Niners defense once again for the first time in like 30 years. I would love Chris Kocurek to get promoted within house to be our defensive coordinator. But again, with Chris Kocurek, I just don't know if he's willing to take on. I don't think he really wants to take on a bigger role. I could be completely wrong, but it seems like, again, he's just got a passion for defensive line, and he specializes in that. And there's nothing that has kind of persuaded me to say that he would be open to taking a defensive coordinator role with the Niners. Again, I hope he would, though. I would love Chris Kocurek as the defensive coordinator. He's got the energy. He brings the energy that DeMeco did and that Robert Saleh did, and that would be great, on that end. And not only that, but I think with this Niners defense, like, it starts with the defensive line, and a guy like Chris Kocurek knows that. And again, he would very, very well have success with this defense. And he would actually, make it start with the defensive line and that front seven, rather than doing something like Steve Wilks did, where he kind of relied too heavily on the corners and on the secondary. So, yeah, man. I mean, again, it'll be interesting. I think with Mike Vrabel, he's a very, very good defensive-minded head coach. I think, with Mike Vrabel, he would also bring that type of energy that like Pete Carroll would, in terms of, kind of getting along with the players and kind of just bringing that energy and that spark to the defense. But we'll see what happens. I mean, again, I definitely think Mike Vrabel, for one, Mike Vrabel was surprisingly shut out of the head coaching side. I was shocked he wasn't able to land another job. It is what it is. I mean, Bill Belichick didn't land a job either, and that's just as shocking. But to me, Vrabel was a premier head coaching candidate, and yeah, I kind of shocked me. But Vrabel would be he would be a guy that could come in and work well at this Niners defense. I think one thing worth considering from the Niners standpoint is that Vrabel has one season of experience as a pure defensive coordinator. Great defensive-minded head coach, but not a lot of experience. And in that season, it was with the Texans, and the defense clearly regressed a lot in that one season, and they finished 32nd in points, allowing more than 27 per game. But again, man, like Vrabel has very good leadership. It helped him land the job in Tennessee, and he did have a large role in the Titans' defensive success over the past 6 seasons with the Titans. But Kyle's priority might be finding somebody who can nail down the finer details on the defensive side of things, and maybe he goes in that direction. Aside from Mike Vrabel, a guy that has more leadership traits and more leadership skills than I guess defensive coordinating skills. So we'll see what happens, though, man. I mean, I definitely think one of those guys I'm confident will get the job. Kyle could also go on the limb and hire a wild card that I haven't even brought up. So I definitely would expect Kyle to make this a very thought out and thorough process, and for him to bring in the right guy for this defense. And there's no doubt in my mind that he will do that, but we just can't have the same situation that we had with Steve Wilks. And I think Kyle learned from that, and I think he knows that. So we'll see what direction they go with defensive coordinator. Obviously, let me know who you guys think they should hire in the comments down below. But yeah, I'll keep you guys monitored on this situation as well. It's going to be a big offseason with the Niners. I mean, when it comes to the Brandon Ayuk stuff, the defensive coordinator role, and so much more, the draft. So, as always, go Niners, and I'll see you guys in the next one.